Welcome to the Changing the Perception of Sales podcast, and today I'm delighted to say we are joined by Jess Lorimer. Jess, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm actually really excited. Nice recording studio. Love it.
It is indeed. I know you're keen to replicate this potentially in your own home as well.
Yeah, as we speak, I'm going to be Google imaging.
That's fine. Well, we can give you all the tips and tricks anyway. But thank you for joining us and making the journey up today. As always, for those that are listening in that might not know who Jess Lorimer is, please give us a bit of an introduction into who you are and what it is that you do.
Yeah, so obviously I'm Jess. I've been running my own sales training company for the last 11 years now, which makes me feel incredibly old. Only less so when I talk about the fact that I've been in sales for 18 years. So I'm like the dinosaur. I started out in recruitment, loved it. Absolutely amazing environments. If you are going to recruitment, yay you. It's the best grounding you'll ever get. And in 2014, set up my sales training consultancy and now work with tech organizations around the world to support their new salespeople in learning how to sell effectively.
Brilliant. Love it, Jess. And shout out to recruitment as well. Great industry, but I'm
Big
a little bit biased. You've said you've been in sales for 18 years then, and dinosaur. I'd say not quite dinosaur, but maybe. Where did it all start then, 18 years ago?
Do you know, it actually started when I got fired from my first job, which was a barista. I was terrible. So I made like 16 cups of cold coffee on the bounce, and they looked at me and went, I don't think this is for you. And I was like, no, that seems reasonable. Went and sat outside a jewelry shop and got chatting to some woman who was thinking about buying a gift for her niece, I think it was. And we got to chatting about what her niece would like. And she said, oh, do you want to come in and have a look? And I was like, yeah, of course. I was waiting for a bus and to hide my shame at being fired. And went in and she ended up buying something and they ended up thinking I was the niece. And I was like, no, I've just met this woman. And so the guy offered me a job. Was like, oh, seems like you can sell stuff. Do you want to come and sell jewelry? And I was like, yes, I do. So I ended up selling jewelry for a few years, went to university, and then went to work for a big recruitment firm outside of uni, realised that perhaps a degree in theatre wasn't going to be as useful in the real world as I thought it was. And so I ended up working for a really cool recruitment company and never looked back.
Brilliant. So it started all those years ago. Can you remember, I mean, that was your first ever sale, but can you remember your first ever sale once you'd officially got the job and how it made you feel?
I sold a pair of $9.99 Creoles, which for anybody who isn't old enough to remember, they were like those big hoop things with like the straight line through them. And I remember thinking, well, I do get like a percentage of this though. So more $9.99 Creoles for me.
Nice. Love it. And you mentioned theatre degree. Interesting, a lot of people with theatre drama backgrounds do end up going into sales actually, or is what we typically tend to find. You started in recruitment post-university and then have set up your own sales training company you've done for over 10 years now. Yeah. What was the reason or kind of motivation for you moving from the corporate world into setting up your own thing?
Yeah, so I actually loved working for somebody else. And I think that's really important. If you want to get a good grounding in sales, it's much, much better to test that out when you've got a good training program in place and when you've got a big brand behind you who knows what they're doing, their products and services. And for me, I'd been in recruitment for quite a while and moved companies and things like that, worked for some incredible recruitment firms, but was diagnosed with myalgic encephalitis when I was 24. So my neurologist said to me, look, if you keep working the 70-hour weeks, and I was going out, for client drinks every night and having big lunches and basically completely burnt out, you'll be in a wheelchair by the time you're 35. And I thought, well, that doesn't seem great as an option, and I should probably take more care of myself because I'm putting my body under an awful lot of pressure that's just unnecessary. And so I started talking to firms about whether or not I could work part-time. And in 2014, surprisingly enough, it wasn't really the done thing to have part-time salespeople. And so I decided to set up my own business and see whether that would be any easier and whether I could do that more flexibly. And, 11 years on, it's going and growing. And so it would seem that it's a good idea. But I probably would have stayed, if it hadn't been for my diagnosis, would have stayed in London for as long as I possibly could, chained to a desk, because I just love the energy of a sales environment.
Yeah, Well, we definitely didn't want you in a wheelchair at the age of 35 anyway, so it seemed like it
Not
was the right
through my
move.
own doing. I feel like if I'd have, I think accessibility is a huge thing and inclusion is a huge thing, but I think you've got to look after your body and your own health as well and be responsible for that. Like, it's a big part of your performance in your job,
And feel free to tell me to mind my own business here, but I'm just interested. The diagnosis that you had, what does that actually mean, or what did it mean for you at the time?
Yeah, so myalgic encephalitis is a really interesting condition in that it's an autoimmune condition and it comprises of lots and lots of really difficult symptoms. So you can get things like osteoarthritis or rheumatoid arthritis as part of it, chronic fatigue, you get a lot of autoimmune issues. So when anyone is sick anywhere, I get it, and I get it worse than anyone else. But it's something that also can be managed with good health and wellness strategies. It's not to say that you ever get rid of it or recover, but it means that you go through periods of recovery. So I'm lucky in that running my own business now, I've been able to manage my time a lot better, and I manage my nutrition and my health a lot better than I did in my 20s. Embarrassing, but true. And that means that I've not had a flare up in about 6 years. Before that, I would be bedridden for weeks. I'd just go through these periods where my body just couldn't do anything. And I'd be in bed for like 4 weeks, couldn't do a thing. Couldn't even have the lights on to read a book type thing. So not the most sustainable health attitude, really.
Thank you for sharing as well, because I think a lot of people would hear it and not necessarily know actually what impact there would be. And I was really interested to know a bit more about it. What was that like in the early days of setting up the business? Because that can't have been easy, managing that whilst also trying to build a business at the same time.
So I'm like the worst person to give business advice ever, because you can listen to a load of the podcasts, and we were talking about Simon Sinek and all the cool books that you guys have got here. And they all recommend like have a safety plan, do these things. I had none of that. I literally gave up working in London, thought to myself, well, I probably won't be able to get a mortgage if I go self-employed, risky. So immediately bought a flat in Southampton while I still had my pay slips that I could prove that I was earning, and moved into somewhere I didn't even have like a bed. I had like no furniture. I was using like 1-ply toilet roll and a table from the range that had 2 seats. And that was my desk for about, 18 months. I just couldn't be bothered to get rid of it in my kitchen. And at first I thought, well, this is great. I can get up whenever I want, because when I was working in London, it was the done thing to be in the office by 7:30, 7:45. I'd be finishing at 6:30, 7 o'clock, going for drinks, doing all the things that you do to build your network and just enjoy that life. And I was like, oh, I can get up at 9. That's probably okay. And like do a bit of stuff. That is a terrible business plan, as it turns out. Spent the first 3 months not selling really a lot, and started looking back on it thinking, well, this is not good because I'm going to be out of money. And I remember saying to my mum, this is hard. And, I don't know what I'm going to do. And she looked at me and she said, I'm so angry with you. And I was like, what, for giving up my job? And she was like, no, not for that. She said, you spent all this time saying that all these other people could do it. She was like, you said all these other people have set up sales firms, all these other people have done all these cool business things. She was like, and here you are telling me that now you can't. She was like, what makes you so special that if everyone else can do it, you can't? You're the snowflake. And I was like, oh, that's uncomfortable. And it wasn't really the response I thought I'd get. I thought I'd get more sympathy. As I didn't get that, I thought I would go home and figure out a plan, and started looking at how am I actually trying to do business development? Am I doing new lead generation? Am I actually trying to book sales calls with relevant people? I wasn't. So I did that. And then 3 months later, I made my first 100K. And it's just kind of, gone from there, really. Turns out you do need structure and you do need to do the foundational things in order to make money. That is not changing.
Yeah. Nice. And it's probably worth you sharing, actually, because we talked about in the quickfire questions we did prior to this. What was the quote that your mum shared with you?
She always says, like, if you don't invest in yourself, nobody else should invest in you.
Yeah.
And I think that's, I mean, my mum's a harsh critic, but she's very, very clever.
But do you think, going off on a tangent here a little bit, but at that time when you spoke to your mum, let's say she did lead, I'm not saying she wasn't sympathetic at all, but let's say she was sympathetic and didn't give you maybe the tough kind of bit of advice, how do you think you would have responded?
Do you know, I think it's really easy when everybody else buys into your problems to then wallow even further. And I think that what I needed at that point in time was somebody to be like, well, you're just being ridiculous, because if everyone can do it, so can you. You're just not figuring it out. I think if I'd have had the sympathy, I'd have probably ended up having to go back and get a job somewhere else, because, you know, I wasn't doing anything differently. And you can't expect to bang your head against the same brick wall 1,000 times and then suddenly something else to happen. It's just not realistic.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mum, for the advice, and it works. Yeah. Look at you now.
Maybe I should send her some flowers.
Definitely. Coming on to a little bit around your business then and how you've managed your time. You were on a little TV show a few years ago, Good Morning Britain, 6-7 years ago, I think it was.
Yeah.
And it was all around kind of working hours in the UK. I think you were having a bit of a debate. You were talking around maybe 3 days a week, 28 hours a week, and the other person probably going ridiculously extreme, 6 days a week. I know a lot of these debates are intentionally meant to be polarizing, but I'm interested just to get your thoughts from a sales perspective on hours, hustle culture, and just your general opinions on it to kick things off.
I think it's really interesting, and I would say that I'm at that point in my life where I am quite an arrogant top biller now, in that I'm like, well, if I can make the same amount of money in 10 hours a week, why should I have to work 30? Why can I not just do my 10? And people appreciate that. However, most new salespeople don't have the same grounding, network, relationships, sales competencies. And so that isn't realistic as a starting point. I do still think that there's a huge hustle culture in the UK, and I don't think that that's realistic for most people. Generationally, it's also really difficult now for companies to expect that from employees. Gen Z, I mean, God, power to you, because they're sat there like, no, I'm not going to do that. I want time off, and I want a work-life balance, and things that I probably secretly thought in my 20s but never said, and they're getting it. And actually, for companies that are hiring salespeople, that makes it quite difficult, because you're kind of at this weird place in society where sales companies have always done things one way. They still believe in cold calling. They still believe in working 60, 70 hours a week. They're still wanting people to come in at 7 a.m. to hopefully get past the gatekeeper. And it's just not realistic in a hybrid working environment when you have a generation who want a work-life balance. And it also removes them from their training responsibilities, So I think that for me, we should all be working a reasonable amount of hours per week. As you get more experienced, can you flex that? Absolutely. I think in sales you can. It's all about relationships. So you should be able to set the expectation yourself.
When you say reasonable, what do you think is reasonable?
Do you know what? I think if there was an ideal world, I wouldn't work Monday mornings or Friday afternoons, because I think what a waste of time. Like on a Friday afternoon, let's face it, in every job, 2 p.m. comes, everyone's checked out. They don't care. They're going for their weekend. They're doing whatever they want to do. And on a Monday morning, all anyone does is look at their inbox, go and grab a coffee, and then moan about weather or whatever it is. So I think you lose maximum productivity during those times anyway. If you could get people working 25, 30 hours a week, but solidly implementing in that time, I think companies would make a ton more money. I think that they would have much higher retention rates of sales staff. And I actually think that people would be much more useful in the office.
Okay. The Friday afternoon thing's so interesting. I would say the exception to that is recruiters, because we recruit for salespeople, and the amount of time that Friday morning no one returns your calls.
Yeah.
As soon as 3 or 4 p.m. on a Friday comes, everyone starts coming back to you like, oh no. But kind of take this to the next level then and put you in a little bit of a scenario, because I think in entry-level sales interviews up and down the country, hiring managers will be sat there and candidates might be asking questions such as, what are the working hours?
Yep.
What are the holidays? What does work-life balance look like? And I know a lot of them might not admit it, but I know a lot of sales leaders will probably sit there and go, that's a little bit of a red flag. So how would you maybe educate those people? Because it's coming from a good place. It just really probably old school. So what would you maybe say to those people?
I think there's a difference between working hours and working productively. And I think that's what the UK as a whole hasn't got used to yet. And that's what's interesting, because I think I'm with you. I think sales leaders, it's absolutely the right question to be asking ourselves. Is this person going to be dedicated if they're already asking about when they can take time off? The two don't necessarily match. However, if you're running a proper interview process, you should be asking those people questions like, what would you be doing your first 90 days? How are you going to make us money? What's your new business plan going to be? What are you going to do with our existing leads or our new leads? And most of them aren't asking that. And so if they did, and someone was saying, okay, well, in my first 90 days, this is how I'd identify a new market. This is how I would target the stakeholders. This is what I would do with outreach or whatever that looks like. Would it be such a red flag for that person to ask about holiday or working hours if they've demonstrated clear competence and confidence that they'd be able to make the money? Probably not. Because let's face it, every sales environment you go to, you get top biller. I used to be that person. And I'd make a bunch of cash. And at that time, call numbers were the thing. It was like, you have to do 20 hours a week on the phone. And I'd always say, well, I'm well exceeding my target, but I'm doing like 12. And they go, well, how much more money could you make if you're doing 20? And I was like, obviously none. I'm working as hard as I possibly can. Take the win. And so I think, sales leaders need to start looking at their top performers in their teams and looking at what time are they actually spending on sales activities and what time they just sat in the office on Tetris or whatever the thing is now.
Yeah. Tetris, what a game, by the way. Absolutely love.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
It's Tetris or Candy Crush or...
Candy Crush is like the newer Tetris.
Is it?
I think there's probably other ones.
I've
Tetris
never
was quite
played
old
it.
school.
Yeah, well, I want a Nokia 3310 back.
For
Snake.
Yeah. Remember Snake on the later phone where you could start to go through the walls, but I preferred the original one where, as soon as you hit the wall, you're out.
Yeah.
Anyway, we digress slightly. So this hustle culture then, how do you think we do change it? Because I personally think there are positives when it's done in a healthy way. And I think people early on in the career, there is merit to not doing ridiculous hours, but sometimes if you do need to do more than maybe what the average person would do, that can be working smartly as well, or more smart, not necessarily doing more hours than everyone else. But how do you think we shift this then?
I think new salespeople have to stop whining about how hard it is when you first start, and I did this. So, I started and I was like, oh, it's so hard. Oh, I don't have any of the leads that anyone else has. Oh, my life is so difficult. And, unfortunately, everybody else has better leads or, their deals come in quicker because they are just better at selling. And there's an argument to be said that new salespeople absolutely need to spend time in the office, at desk, hearing what experienced salespeople are doing and learning from that. However, there's a difference between learning and developing your skills and doing that in a supportive environment and being made to succeed versus arbitrary targets and hustling for no reason. So if I take you back to the call example from earlier, there was no need for me to do 20 hours a week on the phone because I was outperforming my peers doing 12. What would have been more useful is for a company to go, okay, well, how can we progress your skills then, you arrogant little toe rag? Like, what else can we make you do? Can we make you train other people? Can we make you do something different? However, that wasn't an option. So I think new salespeople need to accept if you go into sales, you've got no background there, you absolutely need to spend your time learning the ropes, learning the foundations. And once you're good at it, then you need to think about, okay, what am I doing that is just performative? So am I showing up at 7:30 because I know my boss likes that and maybe I'll get a promotion out of it? And what are you doing that's actually producing results? And can you do more of the things that produce results? And can you make them more efficient? And can you train other people potentially in your organization to do that? And then argue for the 3-day week or whatever it is, or to work from home. And I think that's the balance that we need to strike, and understanding, what is performative and what actually creates performance.
Yeah. So essentially, if you're staying there or getting in early for the sake of it, so you can be seen to be doing it, it's probably not the right thing to do. But I think there's merit in, actually, I'm choosing to work this particular hour after because I might increase my chances of getting through to my ideal customer profile because they could be on the way home, that's probably a smart thing to do.
Exactly. And I think you also have to, as a salesperson, build a business case for it. There's no point in sitting there and saying, well, I just want to work 25 hours a week because this girl on the podcast said that would be good. I'm sure all companies out there are like, thank God she said that. But there is a point in saying, hey, look, actually, I'm getting in at 5 a.m. on a Monday morning to get all of my admin done. I'm banging the phones from 7 because that's when my clients are on the train into wherever they're going. And then I want to knock off at 3. Like, build the business case, show that it's going to work if that's what you want to do. Don't arbitrarily kind of hope that a company is going to notice your particular performance and not expect more from you, and manage your own expectations and boundaries around that.
Yeah. Got it. Like it. Moving on then from kind of hours, hustle culture, because I think there's some really good stuff in there. We spoke prior to the podcast when we had a bit of a catch up beforehand around sales as a skill. And part of changing the perception of sales is something that, well, we believe, but you believe as well, should be taught in schools. Tell us a little bit more around your kind of thinking, thoughts on why sales would benefit from being taught to people at a much younger age.
I think sales comes in and sales skills come in at every part of life. Like, I've got a husband, and and sometimes we agree on what to watch on television. A lot of the time we do not. He wants to watch like a World War II thing. I want to watch Below Deck. And guess who wins? Me, right? Because I'm the one who's got the sales skills to be like, oh, well, we could watch Parachute Regiment jump into wherever again, or just throwing it out there, we could think about whether or not our brains need some chewing gum for the mind. And he's like, oh yeah. Like, and wouldn't that be better with reality TV? Right. It's those skills around understanding human behavior, around understanding how we can support people's decision making. It's also the skills that you learn around boundaries and your own worth. Knowing whether to take a deal or not take a deal, and how much work it's going to be, and what red flags are. It's also about things like positioning yourself, being able to influence others, to create and leverage a network of people, I think is a big skill. It's something we don't have in the UK. In the UK, it seems very awkward to say when you're good at things or to ask people to do something for you. That's really sad. Because most people's careers, even if they don't go into sales, they won't get promotions if they don't know how to build networks internally. They're not able to get pay rises if they don't know how to set boundaries and talk about their own worth. They're not going to be able to get stakeholder buy-in for big projects and things unless they know how to build business cases and talk to people. So I think if you start teaching children this at an early age, yes, they could go on to be amazing salespeople and have great sales careers. More importantly, I think you become a better rounded human being and you learn communication skills that will see you through friendships, relationships, work scenarios, and all those other things that become critical as an adult.
Yeah.
That was very pretentious, wasn't it?
No, I like it. And one thing you mentioned around the kind of salary, but also the promotion conversations internally. Keen to get your thoughts on this then. Let's say I'm listening to this podcast and I am in a sales role and I'm going, I want that promotion. I think I'm ready for it. I think your good friend Simon Sinek's actually done a few bits on asking for pay rise and promotions as well. But
of course.
And they want to approach that conversation, but they don't know how to do it. Obviously, you can't just go in there and go, give me this now. How would you approach or advise someone to approach that conversation so they can get that promotion?
I think the first thing I'd say is know what promotion you want, because salespeople and top billers particularly don't always make great sales managers because they love to bill, not to train other people. So you've got to think about what role you actually want a promotion for and whether it's going to be worth it and pay off. If you have to go into training people and you don't like that, it might actually just be worth selling more and making more commission. If you can find something you want, then take the business case. I think most people go into conversations about promotions and pay rises in exactly what you've just mentioned. I'd like some more money. And people are like, great, I'd like a Ferrari, but we're both disappointed. So build the business case. Talk about, what have your previous billings been over the last 6 to 12 months? What do you anticipate is going to come in over the next 6 to 12 months? What's your plan for growth? You know, show that you're actually invested in owning the sales desk that you operate and that you care, and put together that business case for, if you paid me more or if you gave me a promotion, these are the things that I'd be able to contribute to the team that are outside of my current job description. And that's really important, because in sales, your job is make money. But if you want a promotion, your job becomes, how will you enable the team? How will you motivate other people? How will you increase revenue overall? And you need to be demonstrating that in that pay rise conversation, and then being really clear. Okay, these are the things that I'd be willing to bring to the table. How much are you willing to pay me in return for that investment?
Yeah.
That's what I do.
They'll give it really practical way to approach those conversations. And coming back to sales education then in schools, Jess, let's say you are a teacher and we're in a classroom and we've made it. We've successfully changed the perception of sales, and now sales is taught in schools up and down the country in the UK. What does that first lesson look like, do you think?
Sure, I'd say buying indicators. I think kids are like the ultimate salespeople, because they start with why, always. Gosh, can't get away from them today. But you know, kids always ask why, and they're not afraid to ask what they want. What they're not very good at is understanding what a buying indicator is. So if they get told no, they just repeatedly ask why, and hopefully that changes for them. If they were able to understand buying indicators that are positive, i.e., does someone's body language change? Do they start saying maybe instead of no? Or if they were able to objection handle better, then I think they could take over the world, which would probably be very, very dangerous. But, you know, no worse than the current political party, I guess.
Yeah, nice. Start with buying signals. I agree as well. The young generation is so much more naturally curious. Why? So, yeah, they're already on the right track. And you mentioned something earlier on about cold calling. I think when you were referring to maybe the 80s and Mr. Belfer, I couldn't help but save that cold calling piece for later, talk about sales education. Do you believe in cold calling?
No.
Really?
No, not anymore. Do you know, and I love cold calling. And it is worth saying that every Friday morning, I get up and cold call for a bit of a laugh. I just like it. And I like to hone my skills. And annoyingly, a lot of the companies that I go to, they want a lot of cold calling training. So people be like, oh, you just ask us to do stuff that you haven't done. I'm like, okay, let's go. And I'll do it. However, cold calling in today's environment really changed. Post-COVID, it's become really difficult for salespeople. And I would argue a complete waste of time. Because the chances of getting through to organizations that have a switchboard, that have people who are working primarily office-based so they can actually put you through, is just diminishing massively. All of the bigger companies have started to downsize or hot desk. A lot of employees aren't even being given mobile phones. So you're just wasting so much money on the phone bill when you could be doing better email outreach or LinkedIn outreach or getting your salespeople to go to networking events for that industry. Literally anything else would cost you less as a company and provide a better return.
Interesting.
I know, and I'm gutted about it. I am. You could use the phones for pretty much everything. I think cold calling is definitely dead, but actually having conversations over the phone instead of video or instead of doing everything by email, that's like the salesperson's gold now.
Mm. When you say cold calling, what's the definition in your mind of cold calling?
Cold calling is when you call an organization and either go through to their switchboard to try and find the person and get in touch with the decision maker you actually want, or when you have the direct dial for a decision maker that you've never spoken to before. So basically, it's that first point of contact with somebody that you don't know. Yeah.
So I think the former, the element of it is dead. I think trying to get through to office switchboards, you can get lucky. I have to disagree. I think cold calling is well and truly kicking. We've got people out there that are doing it and actually generating sales that have come from nothing whatsoever. But I do think there's a case that it completely depends on the industry that you're in and the type of sales that you do. And that's the thing with sales. There's so much advice on LinkedIn and from gurus or whatever it may be. things can work for different people in different industries.
Massively. And you've got to admit, like, most of the advice on LinkedIn these days is absolutely terrible because people have just rinsed it from ChatGPT. I don't know about you, but your best salespeople are not sat out there on ChatGPT putting all of the ways that they do
I hope
really
not.
well. Yeah. And then being like, oh, it's fine. Everyone can just rinse it. Like, only the people who think they're okay at sales are putting anything in ChatGPT. So anything you get from that is just a load of old rubbish.
Yeah. But yeah, we might have to agree to disagree on that. I think cold calling can be alive, but I do agree that there can be a lot of leakage, wasted time. It's not that effective. Connect rates are lower than they've ever been. That's why it's really important to make sure you've got the right tools, tech, data to make it work. If you've not got that, yes, you will waste a lot of time.
Yeah, and also the difficulty for companies is that, you know, back in the day when I learned to cold call, you were on a bank of desks with lots of other people, a bit like here, where you're cold calling all the time. So you would pick up different ways of saying things and different ways of opening your cold calls. Now that a lot of environments are remote working, actually new salespeople just aren't getting enough exposure to that. So they don't know what's going on. And so you end up with these really waffly elevator pitch type things that they have got off of ChatGPT that just don't convert.
Yeah. That I can definitely agree with. Being in the office for sure is better when it comes to cold calling anyway.
Yeah.
Just learning from osmosis.
Yeah.
Talking on or moving on to now kind of naturally into your business now, selling to C-suite. We talked about cold calling, a little bit around why sales should be taught in school, but this kind of is a nice segue into selling to B2B. Why did you focus the business that you run now on selling to C-suite or selling to B2B organizations?
Because I'm hideous with Instagram. I think was the start. So I don't know if anyone has ever tried selling to consumers, but it's basically a nightmare in that your job is to create some kind of funnel where you have as many leads as possible in the top, and through the process of, you know, free content, social media posts, podcasts, whatever it is, you get down to a tiny percentage of buyers. And that percentage is actually 1% to 2%, which for me, as somebody who's quite lazy and just wants the quickest way to achieve the goal, seemed completely unreasonable with my like 200 Instagram followers or whatever it is. However, selling B2B, average transaction value is much higher. So the average transaction value in the UK for a business to business sale is £10,000, which is 5 times higher than B2C. It's also got a 25% conversion rate. So the average person with zero sales training can convert 25% of their deals, which I think is quite cool, instead of 1% to 2%. And I was just better at it because I like process. And for B2B, there is a process. For business to consumer, it's popularity. And that's not something I've ever been. So, you know, I'm okay with that now. But like, you know, I think that for me, process outweighed popularity significantly. And there was more of a need, you know, to be honest.
You've mentioned lazy a couple of times. I don't think you're lazy. You've got but I think that's what it is. I think looking for the end result as quickly as possible, maybe lazy in some aspects, but the fact you've been on a train here today, set up your own business, been very successful. I don't think you're lazy, but what I take from that is just want to get it done as quickly and efficiently as possible. Yeah,
I think that's kind of where we talked about the hustle culture piece, but to hark back to that, that's possibly the difference, and maybe that should be the definition, is how efficiently are people getting to the goal, not how many hours can we make them spend in the office until they hit the goal.
Yeah,
you know. But yeah, I think efficient maybe is a better word.
Well, nothing wrong with lazy sometimes, but you mentioned then about a B2B. One of the reasons you do it is there is more of a framework. Maybe it's more predictable potentially in the way that it operates. I know you've got a little bit of a 5-step framework for selling to C-suite. So if you wouldn't mind just sharing with us what that framework actually looks like, so people listening to this might be able to apply that to their day-to-day.
Yeah, massively. And it's the exact same framework that I teach inside companies. So if you're somebody who's a new salesperson and you go to an interview and they say, what would you do in your first 90 days? This is like perfect to rinse. So the first step to any sales process is clarity. Who are we selling to? And what commercial benefit or transformation are we trying to sell to them? You know, and that's different. Like recruitment, you are selling the best candidate for a job. Technology, you might be selling a transformation that a particular piece of software will provide, you know, it will reduce wasted spend or whatever. Then you've got lead generation. So the process of generating qualified leads, meaning decision makers who are actually interested and responsible for your area of specialism, and most importantly, who hold the budget to pay you. That's what a qualified lead is. And your lead generation method could be anything you like, or a company will define it for you. So it could be email outreach, could be cold calling, could be LinkedIn, networking, whatever that looks like. You might even go to a company and get lucky. They might be like, oh, we've got this huge database. And you can use those as well. You've then got business development. So the process of building, maintaining, and leveraging relationships. And I think this is the bit that everybody assumes is just sales calls. So how are we holding our initial sales conversation with a new contact? I would argue it's actually a lot about the follow-up, because you are unlikely, especially as a new salesperson, to make a sale on your first ever sales call. It's going to take you a few. And so you're actually going to have methods of following up. You're going to have ways that you keep in touch with people. That might be emails. It might be that you call them every couple of weeks. It might be your company has a newsletter, whatever that looks like. Then you've got offers and proposals. That's quite simple. And again, if you work for a company, generally they will have defined the offer for you. And they'll probably have a proposal process that you can rinse as well. So there's very little to do there. It's all reliant on how you manage in those sales calls and conversations. And then you've got delivery and resell. And that's probably, for me, the most important bit is, as salespeople, we get really excited to get the contract signed, to make money. We forget the handover process or the onboarding process. And then the customer ends up having a really, really bad experience and means that they don't end up buying from us again. That's difficult for companies, because actually it's so much easier to sell to a person or company that have bought before. It's so much easier for them to buy from you practically and on other levels around like culture and understanding the business. So salespeople who just hammer home for the initial sale and then wash their hands of it end up costing companies a fortune. You know, it's really problematic.
Yeah. We can speak from experience where we've had great sales process. Like, oh, we can't wait to start using this. And I go, oh, really? Yeah. No, we won't be continuing with that. So I think the last bit is key. Let's go through some of them and dissect them a bit more then. So let's start with clarity.
Yeah.
I'm in sales. I maybe feel like I'm lacking clarity on who I can actually help solve problems for, help transform, in your opinion. How do I go about that process of identifying who my ideal customer may be?
So I think it depends on whether you work for a company and you're assigned. So usually you'll be assigned like a vertical or a location or both. If you are assigned to that, great, just get cracking. Don't spend your time worrying about anyone else and whether they're going to make more money than you or less money, or whether they've got a better market or whatever. If you aren't, and your job is completely new business and it's to go out and identify those, go with something you like or know first. Because business development inherently is quite a difficult and ongoing process. It will go better sometimes than others. And at least if you're interested in the area that you're specializing in, you're going to be able to keep those conversations going even when it's hard. You know, you'll pick up and retain more knowledge and information. It doesn't mean that, you know, I started out in tech recruitment. I didn't know a thing about technology. And it was like, oh, go and recruit C++ developers or something. And I had like computers for dummies in my drawer. What I learned was I didn't need to have the most technical expertise in the room. If I needed that, I would have been a developer. What I actually needed was to be able to have conversations with those people about things that made it understandable for me so that I could sell them to other people. If you're looking for clarity, choosing that initial industry is going to be so important, to choose something you know or like, because then you can explain it to other people. You can target much more easily, and all of your outreach and business development becomes a lot simpler.
Yeah. Okay. So we have clarity. Lead generation, we've kind of touched on a little bit. We talked about cold calling. You said email outreach, LinkedIn. Yeah. There's a variety of different ways from that bit in the BD perspective. But on the bit I was keen to touch on was the follow-up that you mentioned. Yeah. So a lot of the time, follow-up can be referred to as just checking in, just nudging up the inbox, which obviously is not that effective. Yeah. What advice can you give for people that want to follow up more effectively as part of their sales process?
Make it easy for somebody to say yes or no. I think that a lot of the time we spend focusing on, are we developing rapport? Are we being nice? If we're nice to the prospect, maybe they'll buy from us, or maybe they'll sign off the deal. And honestly, it's such a waste of time, because there are so many things in a sales call that you should be looking for that can tell you whether or not that deal is going to go through or not. And so if you've got to the point where you've been ghosted on a proposal for ages, for example, you may as well just go back to that prospect and say, hey, look, it seems like this might not be a priority for you right now. I'm going to close down the file on it. If you want to talk and rescope it, let me know. Happy to chat. Because it gives them an out. It gives them a, yeah, this is completely off our priority list and it's dead. Or, oh gosh, no, I just haven't had time to come back to you. And that's what we should be empowering salespeople to do, is not feel like they always have to win, but know that their primary job is to get a decision of some kind and as quickly as possible, so that we're not forecasting ridiculous pipelines that never come into fruition.
Yeah. That's a really scary thing for a salesperson to do, though, isn't it?
Yeah. As someone who runs their own business, I'm like, oh God, please just say yes. But then business Jess is like, yeah, it doesn't seem like that's a priority for you.
But I think you mentioned on your website around, I think the word sleazy is on there in trying to coach and train people not to be like that. And there's something so powerful about a salesperson almost having it doesn't matter to me if you say no, that's fine. It's almost like a very powerful thing to be able to have, as opposed to maybe being sleazy or a little bit desperate.
You've got to be detached from your sales process. And that sounds really easy from a voice of experience. I think it's much harder when you're new, because you hold on to every single process and want it to work. However, to combat that, you need to have enough going on in your pipeline. That actually doesn't matter. If a deal falls out, like deals do fall out. In sales, you are going to experience way more no's and rejection than you will ever get yeses. Your job there is to not waste time on things that are just not going to pay off. And that means having transparent communication. So we're not trying to hard sell people anything. We're not trying to push them into decisions they don't want to make. Our job is to be transparent. Hey, what is your timeline on moving on this? If they say, it's going to be like 9 months, well, don't write a proposal now. What's the point? Like, you're just wasting time. They're benchmarking or scoping. They're not buying. It's having that ability to differentiate between important information that you can do something with now, and actually being consultative and saying to the decision maker, there's no point in me doing this for you now, because by the time it comes to you actually buying, the prices are probably going to have changed, or the candidate is not going to be on the market. So if you're not ready to move, that's okay. But I just need to know.
Yeah, got it. And the last thing on selling to C-suite, kind of linking in with the title, there's a lot of people that might listen to this, or a lot of people that might listen to this, that hire entry-level, junior-level salespeople. And one of the things they will find the most daunting is, I've not been in sales at all, or not for very long, and I'm now having to cold call or engage with or message or email people that are managing directors, chief executives. What advice would you give as the owner of selling to C-suite for those people just in terms of how to engage with that level of prospect?
Sure. I think, everyone puts their trousers on one leg at a time. So I honestly don't think it's the big deal that a lot of companies will try and make out it is. I think the most important thing for new salespeople is to be polite always and curious, because that will get you a long way. It's actually much better to say, I don't really know what a managing director does. Could you tell me? Because people love to talk about themselves and what they're doing, and that develops far more rapport than being like, oh, hey, how are you today, Paul? You don't care. You don't know him. Like, it's irrelevant. So I think always be polite, always be curious. And I think the politeness piece is key, because a lot of salespeople will, if you use that follow-up example from earlier, I once worked with somebody who was so keen to sign a deal that they called the prospect multiple times, as in the teens of times in one day, left a voicemail every time. And when the person called them back, they recognized the number and they picked up and went, why haven't you called me all day? Do you want this guy or not? Do you know what? He got fired, obviously, because not great. And the customer was so angry about it and almost didn't take the candidate. The candidate almost lost a job because this guy arguably was really keen, but just went about it in the wrong way. So if you can be polite with people, if you can understand that you're not the center of your prospect's universe, And actually, you can't treat every deal like that. You go a long way, and people at a very, very senior level will be happy to give you information and happy to educate you and happy to share your details and things. It just requires you being polite and curious.
Yeah. I think there's a perception we need to know it all, particularly when we're at entry level, junior level. And actually, it's okay to not have the answers and not to know everything.
It's so damaging. It's so damaging because you can then end up in situations where you're actually inadvertently selling the wrong thing. I work with lots of tech companies, and software is really complex. And so new salespeople go in and a prospect might say, oh, can it do this? And they're like, yeah, I think so. and then it goes the whole way through to the sale being made. And suddenly the customer's really angry because that one thing that they really wanted and thought it would do, it doesn't. And everyone's freaking out and having to pull things apart behind the scenes. So if you don't understand something, ask questions. Don't worry about looking dumb. You will only look like an idiot if you sell the wrong thing later down the line. Better to get out of the way early.
Yeah, agreed. Final kind of bit to touch on, Jess. What do you think the future of sales will look like?
Well, it won't involve AI.
Good.
Do you know, people ask me about it all the time and that relationship between sales and AI. And I think if you're talking about what it looks like in the future, you have to accept that there is going to be a reality where poor salespeople are compensating using AI. And I think it's the death of sales, to be honest, because the greatest thing about having salespeople in an organization is that other people buy from people. They don't buy from robots. Nobody is going onto a website being like, oh my gosh, the help bot was the most amazing I've ever seen. It's not happening. And until we get to a point with AI where chatbots have emotions and can have consultative conversations, I'm not worried about them taking over. I think that there's something far more pervasive where salespeople are thinking that they have to use ChatGPT to create a pitch, or they're so reliant on technology that they think a slide deck is going to sell the offer or solution better than their actual skills. And I think that will really weed out the poor salespeople. It also means that companies will need to spend a lot more time and energy than they perhaps did over the last 5 years training salespeople. Because like we said earlier, people aren't getting that osmosis of learning through others anymore. And so I think that if you combine the two, companies are sort of like, oh yeah, if our salespeople can use ChatGPT, that'll be fine. As results starting to decline, I think that'll change massively.
Brilliant. Jess, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for joining us. Really enjoyed the conversation.
It's been epic. Thank you for having me, and thank you for introducing me to neon signs.
It's a pleasure.